Okay, we have our lovely 30-second countdown. We're very lucky to be joined for another Beyond the Canvas live stream today with a very special artist, something a little bit different, something that I'm very excited about personally because of reasons which I can bring up as well in a bit. But welcome, and well, a big warm welcome, Ana. Or do I call you Ana Maria, or is it Ana? Actually, I've never asked.
No, Anna's great, Brett. Thank you for asking.
Ana. Welcome, Ana. Look, I'm sure for people who are watching, they don't need too much of an introduction if they know you. Very well acclaimed, prize-winning, showing in many museums, well collected, first living artist to be sold, poet to be sold at Sotheby's. The list goes on. But yeah, it's for people who don't know you, tell us a bit about yourself and what you've done and what you're doing and what we're here to talk about.
Well, thank you for that intro. That wasn't an intro. That was really, really generous, actually. I always start, I see this almost like a studio visit, right? We're having almost like a virtual studio visit right now. And I usually start my studio visits by just reminding people that I'm a writer. I've written 6 books. I published my first one 11 years ago now, in Spanish, actually. It was published in Colombia, where I'm originally from. And then since I've published 5 books, most of them poetry, but one is nonfiction and the other was a collection of short stories. And I have 2 new manuscripts that I'm trying to get published right now. One is a novel in verse in Spanish. Good luck getting that one published, right? But that's what we like, the challenge. And then there's a new poetry manuscript that's also I recently completed and feel that it's ready to see the world as well. So my work is really rooted in pen and paper, in writing, in the task of sharing literature with the world. And in getting published and in seeing my work in book form, I really realized, Brett, that the traditional publishing establishment doesn't offer very many options for poets, for writers of experimental work like I am. And I wanted to connect with others. I wanted to build a full life around literature and sharing literature. So I started actually digitizing my verse and infusing my poems with my voice and sharing them on social media. I had a blog back in the day, and and it was just very intuitive for me to start engaging with Web3. It was very obvious that digital artifacts were assets, and that it was possible to be a networked writer, a writer whose writing lives on the web and is shared and read by as many as want to engage with it, while there's also a form of patronage, a form of support, and an assertion of value. I also think that with a market comes participation, which is really fascinating for me because it's wonderful to see my work as a poet exhibited in places where I would have not imagined. For example, right now I have a solo show in a gallery in Berlin called Office in Part, of which the book that we're going to present tonight forms part.
Yeah, so tell us. Well, there's a lot to talk about there. I never want to delve into I suppose it's almost got a negative connotation about, you mentioned some of the issues in the traditional literature market, so we don't have to touch too much on it, but I'm curious, what led you into Web3? Was it because of that? Was it because of some of the things that you saw that were perhaps there holding you back as a creator in the more traditional markets or traditional establishments? Because you still have mixed, you're being shown in the museum right now. So there's an element of trad there. And I love that there's that trad and digital kind of blend. But yeah, there must be, what drove you, what brought you to digitizing your work in the first place, more specifically?
I always felt that as a poet, I was an artist, and I wanted to expand the ways that I presented my work to the world from very early on. When I applied to a graduate degree in poetry, for example, I wanted to do a joint program in fine art and in poetry, but it just wasn't possible. It wasn't available to me. So I took poetry, but I I really wanted already to start engaging with the visual arts, and this was 8 years ago. And I think that it's a mixture, right? There's seldom just one thing that leads us to the right path, but it was a mixture of saying, okay, fine, I'm going to go with the traditional poetry track, doing it in a way that seemed satisfying, but then wasn't. There was always something kind of missing, and I always felt that poets deserved more, and I felt that there needed to be more at stake for the work that we were doing, for this effort of putting the emotions that we value so much into writing, sharing them, getting them published. And then it felt like there wasn't much human connection around the work that I was sharing. It just was very, very solitary. And I wanted really to create connections and a community around poetry. And so it was a joint creative force of wanting to reach beyond the page as a visual artist, of doing performance, of creating fine art, of creating sculpture, of having also a conceptual component to poetry, and then also realizing that a a career as a poet or a life as a poet, because you don't really think of a career, but as a life as a poet, just it was really solitary and it felt very insular. And I felt that the people who maybe were reading my poems were other poets, if at all. And I really thought that that wasn't what the poems deserved, not mine or not other poets either. So for me, the digital technology is not only a way of activating and having poetry reach beyond the page, but of inserting it into conversations, into scenarios, into exhibitions that bring it to full life.
Yeah, and that has really shown in what you do, and you have that digital and that physical mix. And you have, for example, with book sculptures, which we'll get into, the physical books alongside the inscriptions and the NFT with you reading, which I really want to talk about as well. But before that, how did you get into poetry? There've been some very famous poets over time. What's it like being a modern poet, and what led you into writing? Because writing is very much an art form, and I don't think an underappreciated art form, but I think particularly in this space, probably like quite a niche art form still. We see a lot of visual art, we see a lot of animation and whatnot, and writing is very much an art. That my personal connection is obviously being a parent. I read a lot of poetry to my kids, but at an age appropriate level. But I was a primary school teacher for 10 years, and so that really reinforces how important literature and reading and writing is for all humans. But yeah, I'm curious on that journey for you. Oh, I can't. You're still on mute.
Apologies.
Got
I
it.
realized I was a poet really, really early on when I was 12
Mm.
years old. I knew it. It was just a certainty. And it was from reading Sandra Cisneros' The House on Mango Street in seventh grade, actually. And then I read The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock in high school, and that just cemented my conviction in the power of the written word. I think that there's no one way to be a poet right now, Brett, and that's really what I hope others will take away from the opportunities that are offered in the visual arts and in digital poetics, because you can, of course, continue to publish books. You can continue to read at poetry festivals. I was actually at a poetry festival this afternoon where I was invited to read and to moderate a panel. And you can also sell a book on Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. And for me, that is the message that I try to convey, because I think poets have to take it into their own hands. I don't think that it's something that you can do for somebody else. It's a very personal choice about how you want to bring your work out in the world, and it takes a lot of effort. So you have to be fully committed. You have to be all in.
Yeah, for sure. No, I completely agree. And how did you find, well, I suppose potentially at first NFTs?
I think I just started reading the headlines that were coming out, during COVID. It was the cliche way in, but it also felt immediately intuitive. It immediately all clicked. I never had a doubt of what is that that's weird. It was more, okay, I need to be part of this. And there was no looking back for me.
Yeah, and speaking of, I suppose that's where you started bringing your voice to the readings and putting that on ETH to start with. And I know from just having met you and having chatted with you and read more about you, how important you find that littoral, that vocal aspect of poetry and of writing, and also choreography. I noticed with some of your photographs, and just from reading, that's a part of it as well, because obviously writing is also a dance. So I'd love for you to explore that a little bit more.
Sure. So I was already including voice before the blockchain into my work, into the work that I shared online, because I think it's really powerful to deliver a poem the way you intended to be received. And I think there are a few things as intimate as the sound of our voices. And there's so much that you can express through cadence, through pauses, through intonation, through the accents that you place on certain moments, certain turns of the poem. And I always wanted to fuse poetic voice, which is the style of the poet. You know, like a Picasso has a style. You would say a poet like Louise Glück has a voice. There's this very, very strong sort of oracular voice to her poems. And I think that when you fuse poetic voice to physical voice, you really reach some sort of, just magical place of transportation where the poem can really become an immersive experience. I like to say that to me, immersion isn't this massive screen with huge speakers, head to ceilings, but immersion really is a focusing in. Listening is such a powerful form of immersion. Reading is immersive as well, of course. And I think that there's also a great connection between language and body movement, physical language and spoken language. And for me, for example, I need to move my hands when I'm speaking. There's this connection. And whenever I read, I feel people's reactions. I feel the visceral energy that is created. And I wanted to incorporate that energy, that physicality, that visceral moment of connection to poetry into my digital works. And I felt that the way to do it was by designing this choreography that expressed the underlying currents of emotion in my verse. And I fortunately found a wonderful photographer in Madrid who specializes in dancers and has this very raw, pared down studio that has the right vibe. It's a smoky, sort of jazz-filled box, dark, and all there is just movement. It's underproduced. There is nothing sort of veneered about it. It is really the body trying to speak the language of the poem.
Yeah, it sounds like it would have really allowed you to be your visceral self. It must have been quite a moving experience, really, particularly paired with what you write, which is very emotive as well. Do you want to tell us about? I know that obviously, like you said at the start, your writing has spanned across different, I suppose, styles or genres or lengths and whatnot. But yeah, do you want to tell us about you as a writer?
Sure, I'd love to. You have such wonderful questions, Brett. It's always great to talk to you.
Thank you, Ana. I appreciate it. I love it.
Yeah.
This is as a side note, this is such an amazing part of my job. But yeah, I appreciate that.
No, but you're a great interview, I have to say. You can tell that you do it with heart. Poetry and writing accompany my life. So my first book is about being in my 20s, living in Bogota, Colombia, single, resisting pressures to settle down, but also resisting the pressures of sort of the wild underbelly of a massive Latin American city, not feeling quite at home, with the late nights, but not also feeling at home in the routine of the job, and just trying to find that place where it felt like I was myself, that search for self that is so marked in the 20s, and it's so desperate too, right? That there's like that hopelessness of never being able to find comfort within your bones. And so that's really what my book is about. It's called From Sunday to Sunday. And then the next book, a standalone book I wrote, is about my father's illness. He had a stroke and was bedridden for 10 years. And it's about, I told him that I was pregnant with my son when he was going into a surgery where he had his stroke. And his illness is completely joined in my memory with the birth of my son, of course, the pregnancy. I found out I was pregnant the day before he went into surgery. And I guess the next sort of important standalone book that I published is a nonfiction. It's a memoir. It's a fragmented, convulsed text that tells the story of my son's illness. He had seizures. He had epilepsy, and it was our efforts to try to find a way to heal him in the face of a very heartless medical system that is really just like a bad Kafka, maze where you're trapped in bureaucracy and ridiculous questions all day long. And I also wrote a collection of short stories. I wrote these mostly during COVID that are about the entrapment of our daily lives. So there's no real COVID in the stories, but they show how we're kind of trapped in our routine, even though we're free. That's what I really thought was interesting about COVID, about how all of a sudden we're trapped, right, in our houses, but really what we're trapped is within our routines. So that's what the book is about. It's called Tryst. And my most recent book is a collection of poems that I wrote about the experience of being a mammal, of procreation. And I was recently sharing it with an incredible producer of works for artists. And he said something to me that really has stood out, which is, I find it so rare how few works of literature deal with our most creative act, or how many few works of art deal with our most creative act, which is, of course, procreation. And he asked me, he's like, do you think it's risky that you wrote a book about this and that you release work on creation? I said, well, perhaps it's commercially risky. Perhaps there's that component to it. It's definitely personal, but I think there's a bigger risk in not being honest and in not sharing work that actually tells a story and has a connection to what makes life complex.
I couldn't agree more. It's fascinating that it is still considered taboo to talk about, or to really explore, or to dive more deeply into something that is very natural and our most primal mammal kind of thing that we do as humans, and particularly then for the female to carry a baby for hopefully healthily and successfully the required time to have a healthy delivered baby. So yeah, was that something that you thought would be challenging to do? Or would be like a challenging thing for people to read afterwards, or does that not cross your mind during that creative process?
It doesn't really cross my mind, Brett. I realize it afterwards.
Yeah.
When I get asked questions, and then I'm like, oh, I guess it is hard for people because the questions are being raised.
Yeah, and that's good, because you've evoked some kind of, perhaps you've made them uncomfortable, which is a good thing as well, because then they need to, I guess, think about, why did I feel uncomfortable about reading that, which is a good question to ask oneself.
Yeah, I think my book sculptures in particular raise a lot of questions, which is the content, of course, of the book itself, but also the format it's presented in. Of course, it's a book. It's not a framed photo. It's not a canvas. It's not a print. It's a book. And that's the work of art, of course, with the digital components, but the object, the prized object, is the book, which we're not used to regarding as the object of desire that it already is.
And it's very uniquely composed, because each poem is written 197 times.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Tell us about that.
So the book sculptures, I actually have echograph with me because each one is an edition of one, but there's an artist proof that I have for exhibition purposes, because I often get asked to sort of share these and present them. For example, right now I had a pop-up. It was Madrid Art Week in March, and I was asked to install a few of my book sculptures at the Rosewood Hotel in Madrid at the entrance foyer with a little explanation. And I had the echograph there, which I actually picked up yesterday. And every single edition of these book sculptures, there's only going to be 8, has a single poem, and it's a single book. And there's one poem printed 197 times, because if you take the integers in 197 and add them up, you get 8. Again, the number of abundance. And this series inverts the value to scarcity ratio of the book to question how we have valued poetry as a society. But it's a normal book. It has its own ISBN, its international bookseller number. It has a dedication that I love because it's left blank. It says to, then blank, with all my gratitude, and then it's hand signed to the collector with their name here. And it has, they all have the same epigraph by Mary Howe, which says, and to resist metaphor is very difficult, because you have to actually endure the thing itself, which hurts us for some reason. And then there's the table of contents, which is the single poem printed over and over and over and over again. And my writing is very straightforward. It tends to be very much like a punch in the gut, kind of in and out. And I love that quote by Mary Howe, because I do believe that when you over adorn language, it's because you're afraid of saying what you have to say.
Yeah, and I suppose challenging yourself not to fall into the usual traps of those understandings. That's quite fascinating. Well, I suppose I wasn't going to ask you yet, but whilst you have it there, it would be great to have you read Echograph, and then we can talk about the listing, what's up for sale, and what's included, and delve more into that story. Just quickly before we do, I know that there's some photography up at the Office Impart exhibition for book sculptures. Are they shots from your ultrasounds, or are they to do with this, what you actually wrote about, or are they, I don't know, are they composed of to represent it, but they're not actually yours? Are they meaning to ask?
Sure. No, great question. So for this exhibition, I present the same poem, Echograph, through different media. And one of them is a video work in which I worked with a production studio, and I asked them to put me inside the womb. So okay. I put on a motion capture suit and designed a choreography, and I told them, I want you to put my adult body inside the womb, because I want to take back that space. Yeah. And then the photographs that are there is the poem fracturing into fragments, and they're actual timestamps from moments of the choreography and of the video work.
Wow, yeah, I wasn't sure. Thanks for explaining that. How was that experience? What were you going through during that? What compelled you to do that in the first place?
Well, I've been doing choreography, like I mentioned, for some time. And for this, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to, I was also asked to be part of a public arts festival in the UK that has a huge transparent LED screen in their downtown. And so I wanted something that would work for that format, for a transparent LED screen. So it needed to have some color, actually. And I also wanted to take back the space of the womb, because the poem that that is Echograph is very much about that space being invaded by somebody else. And so I had the concept, and I had worked with them before on another work years ago, and I knew they could pull it off with the subtlety and elegance that they did.
Yeah, I think subtlety and elegance is really nicely put, just from what I've been able to see. from images of it. Did you go through anything internally during that experience? Did it bring you back to what the origin, the origin story of Echograph?
Definitely. But it was kind of the other way around. Like I kind of had the idea for the exhibition, had the idea for the video work, and then from there designed the fractured poem. And I knew also that I wanted to have a book sculpture. And the book sculpture is always kind of its own universe because it's just a weird animal within I think most spaces. I was asked to present one of my book sculptures last year, Brett, at an exhibition at Phillips Auction House with, there was a Rafik Anadol, there was a Su Gwen Chun, a Random International, an Emily Shea, and then there was this book with the video work that comes with it, which is a single page turning endlessly as I read the poem. And it's very understated, but that's purposefully so. And it's such a, I always, want to stand and explain it to people because it's such a different piece within a digital art exhibition. And then it's also kind of a weird, strange animal within a fine art exhibition because it's a book. It's a book as a sculpture. And, it's not a framed piece, as I was saying earlier. So it really is its very own thing.
Yeah, you answered, I suppose, could have been my next question about how we don't traditionally look at a book, a physical book. In fact, a lot of us don't even read physical books anymore. I'm guilty. I love my Kindle, but that it really is a sculpture sitting there. It's not what you would typically consider, or would your mind wouldn't go to a book when you consider a sculpture. But it's certainly a fascinating way to consider it.
I think so. And I also want people to consider, why do we not exhibit? Sometimes people do, a few rare book collectors, of course, but why don't we place books beyond the coffee table, typical museum kind of book? Why don't we value these books that are such beautiful objects and represent so much of our history? Why don't we place them front and center in a way that honors their work, honors the contents that they have, honors the poet's craft? I think that there's really a question there to be asked about, what we value and how and why.
And you're right, because a book can be so nostalgic and really, give you that, like, it's almost romantic. I would say that a book is a very romantic object.
Well, it is. It's tactile, it's analog, it's private, right? There's a privacy there, there's an intimacy there, there's a quiet there. So it's not this loud, kind of mindless digital scrolling device. It's something that it means you're kind of centered. I think, whenever you see someone reading a book in a place like an airport these days, it's always nice. It's refreshing. It seems like, okay, that person is taking a moment to themselves, and I'm jealous. Is my reaction. It's like, okay, I need to be reading a book right now, and whatever else I'm doing can wait, because there is that sense of satisfaction that comes from reading that few other things can provide, I think.
I agree. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting way to put it. And reading, the act of reading, and then interestingly, you mentioned earlier when someone is listening to you read your poem, the act of actively listening, not just listening, something's on in over on the side, but active listening and active reading are very mindful things to do. And in this day and age where things move quickly and it's very fast-paced, dynamic kind of environment in which we live, they're some of the most present moments that we have if you're actively listening, actively reading.
I think so too. I mean, I do think it's really immersive, and I think that that we don't do it enough. If we were doing it as much as as we should, I think our mental states would be quite different, Brett, to be honest.
I agree. On that note, shall we get you to read Echograph? Is that okay?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Hold on. I'd taken my gloves off, but now I'm putting them back on. Okay. I really respect these objects. And I love the echograph cover. It's this gorgeous teal. All of my book sculptures have a different blue, but I think echographs is my favorite. This bright blue.
It's quite striking.
It's really striking. So a little bit of context. I wrote this poem. I wrote this poem the night before I gave birth. And it was unexpected. It was sudden because I was 39 weeks, went in for an ultrasound, and I was told by the doctor that my placenta had stopped working and that the baby had lost weight during the last week and needed to come out the next day. And the ultrasound doctor was married to my gynecologist, which was crazy coincidence, right? And so he picks up his flip phone back in the day and says, honey, don't forget to do this and don't forget to do that. And we got to do this. And also that patient, Anna, you need to take out her baby tomorrow. So just, induce her. And I was really taken aback. I felt fine, Brett. I didn't think that there was accuracy in that verdict. And I didn't listen to myself, of course, because I was scared. You don't feel that you could put such a risky decision, in your own hands. And so I went through, of course, with the chemical induced induction, and the baby's heart rate dropped, and I had to go in for an emergency C-section. And once that happened, they realized that the placenta was fine and that the baby's weight was much higher than they had measured. And so it was an error. It was a medical error, and I didn't have to have had the C-section, the induction, anything. And it was not what I had been preparing for 39 weeks. I tried to, be ready for as drug-free as possible of a birth. And it was really crushing to just come down from all that medicine, all the drugs and the recovery, and just feel like something had been taken from me, an experience that I had really wanted to have. And this poem, Echograph, I wrote it the night before. I wrote it after I knew the verdict, but before the baby was born. So it's an innocent poem in the sense that it doesn't know what happens next. And because it doesn't know, it only feels that it knows, right? There's this knowingness to it that doesn't stop suspecting. And I never went back and corrected it. I never went back and edited it. I kept it as is, and it's part of my book. So that's the context. I think it's important to know the story.
It is very, and I'll ask you afterwards. I'm curious about that. I don't want to say lack of revision and editing because it sounds very purposeful, but I'm curious about that. We can talk about it afterwards.
Sure. Echograph. Man with ultrasound wand says baby is losing weight. We must take your baby out. I will call your doctor. Tell her to induce you tomorrow. Outside the room, my doctor and wand man are husband and wife. His call, one of groceries, of takeout dog, of pickup kid. And wait, before I forget. Are you sure? I ask. I feel so well. Baby inside me feels so well. This is not a thing you'd sense. See, hear, plain, as clear, cold, gel. Take mine, reference it. My placenta stopped working. No food for my firstborn. Such physical failure, a not uncommon thing.
Yeah, it's you can tell how raw it must have been at that time of writing.
Definitely, definitely.
Did you think it was going to become something that you'd put out to the world?
I mean, I was publishing my books by then. It's not everything I write makes it into a book. Some poems never see the light of day. They see a different kind of light, I guess. But no, I didn't know for sure this poem was going to be something. Definitely never an exhibition, never a book sculpture.
Mm.
But that's what I wanted to do when I chose it to be this sort of the shell of the exhibition. I wanted to go back 12 years and become a body who takes control, become a poet who writes their own story, become a patient who subverts the doctor's verdict, and become an adult back in the womb.
And when you write, and particularly this one, is there an element of it being a therapeutic experience for you?
Definitely. You're staring it in the face. You're definitely staring something that happened in the past in the face. And you're making others stare it in the face, right? Which can be difficult. But I think it's through that you actually create connection. It's through the personal that you can access the universal. And what the poem means to me might mean something different to somebody else. You know, I really do think every reading is its own universe. And you've heard this poem, I know, more than once, Brett, and it probably is a different experience every single time.
It really is. I'm going to quickly put, we have 300 and something people tune in, which is lovely. And we had Andrea Bologna, who's a wonderful generative artist, just give you a little clap for your reading. So thank you, Andrea, and thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for your work. It's absolutely beautiful as well.
So beautiful. And I really love connecting with Andrea through Ordinals. It's been wonderful to get to know them.
Yeah, he's wonderful. So Book Sculptures is up on Gamma now, and Echograph is listed. But beyond that, what is the inscription is listed, but what more is there? I know that there's the physical book, there's the reading, the turning page on ETH. Tell us about, you know, what's on offer here and why it's so special to you, and I guess bringing it to Bitcoin and putting it out to the world in this way. And also then we can talk about the fact that your writing is on Bitcoin and it's given it that different permanence to what it might have elsewhere. So
this book really, for me, there's so many layers to what I think it can say. It tells a personal story. It tells a story about how we value poetry, but it also tells a story about how we've recorded our precious memories and stored them. Of course, the book, a centuries-old filed storage system, something that revolutionized how we operated within the world. And then it comes, of course, with a video piece, digital media, also another revolution, an evolution. And the digital wields something that the page cannot, which is voice. And I wanted voice to be a part of this work. And so it has a video component minted onto the Ethereum blockchain of this single page turning. And again, the video work is purposefully barefaced because it's again saying the poem is the work of art. This doesn't need anything spinning or dancing or bright colors. It is just language and sound. And then there's the Bitcoin component, which to me is really evocative of this very primal, even though it's very tech, right? And it represents a future in many ways. There's this primal primacy to it because you're just inscribing the text. And there's no visuals here. It's the text of the verse, and it really becomes an indelible record of the poem that is kept and is stewarded by a collector who knows that this poem exists out in the world and can be read and enjoyed by anyone who wants to, but they become the patron. They become the steward and the guardian of the words that put it together. And so this triptych, right, this 3-part work documents the evolution of our file storage systems, from paper and pen to video and the digital, digitizing, the Kindle is of course sort of a nod within this video, and now the decentralized ledger that is the blockchain, which for me is another file storage system and represents a huge jump forward in the ways that we're going to be able to store our precious memories and keep them safe for the future. I mean, I think that poets back centuries ago, if they would have had a blockchain or a decentralized ledger, we probably would have had more of Sappho's fragments stored right now, but unfortunately they got lost. And so I think that there is this magic record keeping capacity to Bitcoin, and it being the original blockchain, the first one, is also for me special to have the poem on it. And it's wonderful that it allows for that also. The technology really just invites you to write on it.
I completely agree. It's such an important way to preserve culture and to preserve legacy. You think back through history and there's been so many instances of arts and culture being eliminated, and this is a way that for you and any artist who's putting out their work in any capacity on Bitcoin, it's quite an incredible opportunity. It must have really spoken to you when you first found out about it, and you worked with the Inscriber team and its parent-child, so you have that lovely linkage back to you. So, it doesn't matter what happens, we always know that it's, an Ana María Caballero, and yeah, that's very special in itself too.
Definitely. I love the parent-child metaphor there too, that you can...
Well, it's very pertinent to your poem, actually.
And I love that they're on the cover of Gamma. Thank you so much. On the front page, the book sculptures, and it's really nice. I think you and I feel happy when we see these books. You as someone who loves to read and who worked in education, to see books as accompanying other digital works. It's special because I think it represents that it's an ecosystem that is open to receiving and to inviting other forms of art, and recognizing that there's different ways of presenting our creativity, and poetry is a very important one, and it deserves a place there.
Hey, I want to jump back. It was interesting. You made a comment that it wasn't the first time that I have heard you read Echograph, and I know that you've explored. I can't remember what it was called. Let me check quickly. You've explored 50 ways of looking at a poem. But before you talk about, I guess, the listener or the reader or the viewer's perspective and what that project was like, what about for yourself? It's not the first time that you've read it either. Does it change for you as you read it each time?
It definitely does, and it does when I listen to it too. Listening to yourself read something is always an interesting experience, which is also why I wanted to include the video work. And I guess I should have mentioned that, of course, this is transferred over to the collector of the inscription. So the book is shipped from Berlin, from the gallery. It'll be hand dedicated to the collector, and Amazing. Then they also will receive the video work, the ETH. And I do think that every time you listen or you engage with the text, it will resonate in a different way. I mean, and it so much depends on our context, right? If we're tired, if we've read something else before, what kind of a day we had. So many things can influence the way that you engage with a work of literature. Something that has happened in your personal life too recently will spark a new reading. So I do think that each reading is its own world, and I call this analog generativity. And 50 ways of looking at a poem really try to communicate and convey that by giving 50 different people the exact same poem to read and annotate. And they performed their readership through marginalia, through handwritten notes on it. And then I installed these poems in several locations, trying to show other people, what readership actually physically looks like.
And what did you learn from that? It would have been, I love that. It's something that hyper aware of, and linking back to my primary, well, throughout life, obviously, but my primary school teaching days where you were teaching a class of 25 kids, 26 kids, and they were all going to perceive the way in which you were doing it differently. And so you had to really try and cater to that. So slightly different example, but yeah, certainly very, still relevant to the conversation. Yeah. How was that project and what did you learn from it? Did you see a lot of difference? Were there similarities too?
So many differences. So many differences. There's millions of ways of reading the same poem. And it was a short love poem. I was surprised by the creativity. It was really remarkable, and I loved when people would write notes actually about what the poem meant to them and memories that it sparked. But there were also plenty of conceptual interventions where people were crossing out words and trying to make some sort of numeric sense of the language. So there was definitely play. And then there was also just sort of self-reflection through the poem, which is always lovely to engage with as a writer.
For sure. And whilst you're writing, or perhaps after you write and you reread your work, do you consider, is it something that goes through your mind, the effect it may have on the reader? Or is that something that you just say, hey, it's going to be perceived the way it's going to be perceived?
I try to just be honest with myself and with the poem and what it needs. Brett, I think, there's always a reader, there's always an implicit reader to what you're writing, but you can keep them in mind without catering either. But there's a respect that if I'm going to steal people's time, this better be worth it. And I hope to keep it short also, if it's possible. Sometimes that's hard for me, I confess. But I definitely do try to acknowledge that time to read is limited and to make sure you have an impact, to avoid unnecessary metaphor and acrobacy and just sort of trying to over-adorn language.
Yeah, well, I personally don't think you're stealing someone's time. I think that their time is being very well spent reading your work. I can't help but ask, I was fascinated when you said with Echograph that you didn't edit or revise it at all. Is that is that different for you? Do you like, how stringently do you go through your work? I know that a lot of writers, a lot of people who teach writing talk so much about rereading and editing and revising and reconceptualizing work. That's quite a unique. That was quite a unique piece of information you gave us.
So I did revise and edit it, but I didn't inform it of the outcome.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? So I kept that sort of inquisitive innocence to it intact. I didn't add, and then I found out, blah, blah, blah. It stayed in that unknowingness. Yeah. And that's what I meant. I probably wasn't very clear. But I did revise the language and the wording and the format and, worked on it for sure, because it's really those poems that you pop out without need of revision are very rare. They're hard.
I was thinking, wow, how did she write that well without first like pen to paper? There you go.
No.
Yeah. What do you look out for when you reread your work? What have you learned about yourself over time in your writing?
I like to read it out loud, Brett. So it's hard for me, for example, to have music on because I'm trying to get into the rhythm. And if it sounds right, it's usually right. There's a flow, and that flow draws you forward, which is so powerful when a poem has that rhythm forward, that march to it, because then it drives you through when you finish it. When it gets clunky and kind of just like uncomfortable, then you pause and maybe you don't finish it. So I try to make sure that it keeps that rhythm all the way through, that it doesn't lose the punch.
Yeah, for sure. And would you say there's an Ana María Caballero style and rhythm to what you write, or does it still vary?
I think it varies, but I tend to favor straightforward verse. I like to be very precise, economical, and I also like internal rhyme. And I think it helps with the rhythm.
For sure. Economical is a really interesting adjective for your work. I like that. And I noticed also, just from, reading more about you, and we haven't talked about this, and it's actually quite relevant this week, just from people posting things on X, because you can keep up with current trends and whatnot there for sure. You've used AI in your work, and I know that you write and you create physical work, and you've created digital work. So there might be some artists who feel, and I'm not saying this pertains to you, I'm just saying in general, there might be artists who come from such like a physical, sort of visceral artistic style, and then not really like AI, but you've embraced it.
For me, what's interesting about text to image generative AI, Brett, is that we're using language in new ways. We're using language to generate images. Of course, as a poet, you've been using language to generate images in people's minds, but now you're using it in a literal way to generate images on the page or on screen. And I think that jump from the figurative generation of images to the literal one through AI is an interesting evolution in the ways that we read and write. And I think that there's something to be looked at there closer. And so most of the work that I've done with AI, you'll see, really engages with the fact that we're using language in new ways. And what is interesting to me is not so much the result of the image, but the process. And my work with AI are forward-facing processes so that you see what the language is doing.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. I was curious. I too think that it can be embraced and used as a really impactful tool, rather than the alternative mindset where you're like, oh, this is going to take away what creators do. I think creators are just going to be able to use it in a way that feels authentic and intentional to them. As we start to wrap up, is there anything that I perhaps didn't ask you that you thought we might talk about, or that you'd like to share, or any more about Echograph, or anything like that?
What else could I add? I mean, after an hour of me rambling on, I think you've been such a great interviewer, and I really appreciate the effort that goes into it. I know it's really early where you are, and Gamma has been really generous in supporting a project that is very different within the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I hope that it invites more projects like this that use Bitcoin in ways that perhaps are surprising, and also I think honor the chain. There's still versatility, even though it's sort of an older creature, older beast. It still has a lot to give, and I think that's really wonderful that you guys have encouraged this project to sort of live its full expression on Gamma.
Well, I was honored. We were honored that you approached us. We're very passionate about artists and the arts and literature. Poetry is very much, and the arts, I suppose, in this space, people are so used to the visual art component, but the arts is such a wide and varied thing. So it's truly our pleasure. I hope it. I look forward to it going into the hands of a really happy collector, and we can't wait to work with you ongoing into the future. Thanks so much, Anna.
Thank you very much, Brett. I greatly appreciate your time.